Today is about Dave Chaffee, specifically why he seems to be doing so much worse today than he was a few years ago. Dave went from defeating the #1 guy in the world to being totally kicked out of the top 15 rankings. So what happened? What caused Dave to go on the massive losing streak he's had over the last few years? Is it Dave's neck injury? Is it his technique? Or is it something else? In this video, we will cover the highs and lows of Dave's career as well as the reasons behind them. Firstly, we need to establish exactly when Dave's peak was in the sport. Dave has had many impressive showings over the years, but I think nearly everyone would agree that Dave's absolute peak moment has got to be against Denis Saplinkov in 2013. Everybody knew that Dave was strong, but defeating Denis Saplinkov requires something beyond normal strength. This was considered nearly impossible at the time. Despite the odds being stacked against him, Dave manages to defeat Denis. Dave doesn't actually pin Denis, but Denis elbow fouls in this position, resulting in a win for Dave. People have complained about this since it wasn't technically a pin, but I don't think it matters all that much. The point is that Dave was clearly on the same power level as Denis. He was right there with the #1 guy in the world. Dave was ready to be the globally recognized, undisputed best arm wrestler. But unfortunately, this never happened. Dave got another shot at Denis the very next year, and he was still clearly super strong, but he just couldn't quite finish the match. Nonetheless, he was still giving Denis a real run for his money. And in 2014, Denis looked like a mutant, so Dave's power was still certainly world class. But the very same year, Dave had been crushing it back in the States. At WAL Columbus, in March of 2014, Dave won the open weight category, finishing in front of Travis Bagent and Mike Aiello. Then at WAL Las Vegas in June, Dave once again won this tournament. This time, he defeated Devin Larratt in the process. In total, there were 4 WAL tournaments that year, and guess who took first place on the right arm every single time? And Dave's success continued the following year. He won the 2015 WAL Championships, defeating Travis Bagent and Jerry Kydyrgali. At this point in time, Dave wasn't recognized as the #1 guy in the world, but he was still destroying pretty much anyone in his path. At this point in time, the only people who could defeat Dave were Denis and Andrei Pushkar. But the next year, in 2016, this all started to change. Travis defeated both Dave Chaffee and Jerry Kydyrgali in this tournament and made it look easy. But was this really because Dave started to get worse? Or was it just that Travis was an absolute maniac that year and very well may have been the #1 guy in the world? I tend to go with the latter. I think Dave's real issues started in the very next year. At the 2017 WAL Championships, Dave had to go up against monster Michael Todd. And this meant that he had to go up against everyone's favorite move. And as you could guess, this did not go very well for him. He was pretty close, but he just wasn't able to access his side pressure against this move. And unfortunately for Dave, things would only get worse from here. Not only was the King's move a major problem for Dave, but as 2018 rolled around, WAL started to step up their game as far as entertainment goes. Part of the changes they made was they started doing only super matches. This meant that things like Michael Todd's King's move instantly got way better. Or in other words, way worse. Dave had to face Michael Todd in a super match at WAL in 2019. This would be the first time Dave had to go up against Michael Todd, the King's move, and a 3-round format all at the same time. And this is where we really started to see Dave Chaffee's career take a turn for the worse. Dave loses this match 3-0 and doesn't look like he has an answer. Later that same year, Dave would go up against Devin Larratt. And of course, Devin has now developed a King's move of his own, and although Dave was able to get a pin, that was all he was able to do. Once again, he just couldn't quite finish the match. His side pressure was all there, but he just couldn't gain access to it as Devin was applying so much twisting, torquing pressure onto his wrist. If Devin tried to stand up and hook with Dave in this match, Dave probably would have crushed him. But Devin never gave him this chance. Dave ends up losing this match 3-1. For years, Dave was the #1 guy in North America, and it wasn't even close. But now he was behind both Michael Todd and Devin Larratt. And these matches would be the beginning of Dave Chaffee's massive losing streak. Dave did get some wins sprinkled in here and there, but he lost the majority of his matches after this. Dave would go on to face Levan Saginashvili, and as we know, he was totally destroyed. To be fair, so was everyone else who pulls him, but whatever. After this, Dave had a glimmer of hope against Alex Kurdecha. He was able to defeat Alex 5-1 despite being widely considered the underdog, but this shift of momentum would soon be overcome. Later that same year, Dave went up against Genadi at East vs West. Initially, Dave was looking really good in this match. He pinned Genadi 2 times in a row and it didn't look that difficult. But after this, Genadi started to turn everything around. Genadi's endurance proves to be too much and he ends up winning this whole super match, becoming the first link in the chain of Dave Chaffee never winning a single match at East vs West. Dave goes on to lose against Morozov, once again winning the first 2 rounds and then gassing out. After this, Dave goes up against Ermes Gasparini, but once again is unable to win. Ermes defeats Dave with a score of 3-0, and after this, Dave gets run over by Rivas. Things were not looking good for Dave Chaffee. Now to be fair, during this time, Dave did have one of the coolest matches in history against Vitaly at King of the Table, so we did get to see another glimpse of the unbeatable Dave from years ago, but as expected, this did not last long. And the next time we saw Dave at King of the Table, he got completely stomped on by Devin Larratt. Dave also ended up losing to Kamil Jablonski at Knuckles Up, and most people hadn't even heard of Kamil. So how did all this happen? How did he go from beating Denis Saplinkov to losing to just about everyone he goes up against? How did Dave get this much weaker? Was it his neck injury? Although Dave has had quite a bit of trouble with his neck, he seems to have always had trouble with it. It didn't only start in the last few years when Dave started losing. Dave also has had several other injuries over the years, but still, these injuries don't seem to line up with his losses. Personally, I don't think Dave Chaffee has really changed all that much over the years. The sport of arm wrestling is what has changed. When we take a look at all of the times throughout history when Dave was getting the best results, he was pretty much always getting them in tournaments and against people who didn't use the King's move. Even over the last few years, Dave hasn't just been getting crushed by everyone. Oftentimes he wins the first round or 2, showing us that he is just as strong, if not the stronger guy in the match. But then he ends up gassing out after this and losing the whole super match. And by the way, guess how Denis Saplinkov ended up beating Dave in 2013? He beat him in the 2nd round and by King's moving him. In fact, inside of Straps, the only people who have even beaten Dave Chaffee this whole time in round 1 without having some weird technique have been Levan and Ermes. Unless I forgot someone, which is likely. But the point is, Dave is still insanely strong even in 2024. I think if you take everyone that defeated Dave over this whole time period and throw them all in a tournament and ban the King's move, the results are going to look way different. Dave just isn't built to pull in super matches. He's built to pull in tournaments. Now, of course, nagging injuries and age probably didn't help him, but I think that in the grand scheme of things, Dave Chaffee of 2024 isn't all that much different from the 2013 version of himself. In terms of sheer power, I think Dave is still right there with just about everyone in the world. Perhaps if Dave can make some subtle adjustments in his strategy, he can begin to defeat a lot of the same opponents who have given him trouble historically. It's also possible that other avenues will open up for Dave to compete in a format that is a little bit more suited for him. Maybe a tournament format or a best of 3 instead of a best of 5 or best of 7 format. I think that Dave Chaffee really may have more fight in him, and I hope he gets to prove it over this next year.